Welcome to the IMM Friday Flash Talk, anchored by Govin Whittles.
The reason why that responsibility was taken away from the Hawks is not yet known.
With marketing enthusiast Tarasai Moffat.
To have a return on sales, you need to have posts that are going to be engaging.
Brought to you by the Institute of Marketing Management, South Africa. Welcome to another installment of the Institute of Marketing Management's IMM Friday Flash Talk. On this platform, we have insightful conversations about brand strategy, the future of marketing, the present, and what it's been affected by that's led to its current state. We, of course, have been hosting industry leaders, experts, people who have their pulse on the world of marketing and advertising, and could bring some insights into what you should be doing as a marketer, but also what the marketing world is and how it's evolving as the world evolves around it. Thank you so much for joining us again for another installment of IMM Friday Flash Talk. Today we have a few special guests. The first one is Hazel Chimhandamba. She is a veteran of marketing in the SADC region. She's someone with over 18 years experience in strategic marketing in South Africa. And as usual, we have our marketing enthusiast, Tarasai Moffat. She is from Gateway Synergy, and she will help us shepherd the conversation in the right direction. We've had a bunch of interesting conversations. We've brought you interesting guests, and today we're taking a look at something which is on the lips of most marketers. It's the future of brands. So we're talking about brand strategy and what defines tomorrow's brands. Hazel, I think before we get into the conversation, because we have so many questions, just give us your initial thoughts about what you think defines tomorrow's brands.
I think there are quite a few facets that go into a brand strategy, and obviously understanding where a brand is from a lifetime cycle perspective is also very important. Because a brand strategy that is enforced by a brand that is entering a market as a new entrant will be very different and quite disruptive than one that is simply repositioning itself in the market as an existing brand. You know, brands that are over 100 years old have a slightly different set of challenges as they strive to make themselves relevant in the day-to-day context. So I really do believe that the first point of call is understanding where this organization is as far as its lifetime cycle is concerned, and obviously understanding the business model that it's enforcing, because everything else emanates from that, right? I always love to start with the business model canvas because it covers everything, including your customers that you're going to be targeting and how you're going to segment them, as well as the offering that this organization is actually taking out to market. It's all about the customer, but you need to know what your offering is to that customer before you can really define that brand strategy.
Interesting point of departure. It immediately raises the question about whether a brand can stick to its guns because of its offering. Tarasai, I'll have you come in with your ideas of what defines tomorrow's brands. But before we do, Hazel, do you think that some brands who are much older than others have the luxury of being able to avoid the change that's happening around them in the marketing environment?
Not at all. I think we've all read interesting case studies around Kodak and even existing brands like Nokia that have had to reshape their businesses because of the impact that the market shifts had on their brand and their positioning thereof. So I think it's very important for a brand manager, so to speak, to understand what the organizational strategy is and the tenure of that strategy, because that defines the operating model and what they're putting out to market. A lot of companies are always going through some transition or the other as they endeavor to digitalize and possibly change their offering in the market. And that also comes with a different consumer that one starts to target, and the segmenting that goes into that, and ultimately how you position yourself within that space. So you do see brands continuously repositioning themselves as the markets shift, as well as the consumer needs shift.
The direction in which they position themselves is often determined by the industry leader in brand innovation. Teresa, you've just returned from an international fellowship based in the USA, which is obviously seen as the groundbreaker in terms of what brands are evolving or how brands are evolving. So when I ask you how tomorrow or what defines tomorrow's brands, you could probably tell us what tomorrow's brands will look like based on what you've just seen abroad. What's your idea of that?
Thank you for that. So yes, I spent the last 6 weeks in the USA doing a leadership fellowship, which has made me see the global scale in a different perspective. I think in South Africa, we're doing well in terms of our brand strategy, in terms of our brand placement, in terms of our route to market, in terms of being consumer-centric within our approaches. But when I was there within the global perspective, they are very aggressive in their marketing strategies, which is something that we need to pivot on in terms of they're using cutting edge technology, data analytics to drive the brand strategy and to drive the engagement with consumers. And they focus specifically on their presence, not just online or traditionally, but their presence in terms of even with their employees, even within their organizational culture, even in regards to their CSI. So they look at a brand as a whole, not just in terms of, let's say, a product, but in terms of your reason for being in existence as a business, which ties into what Hazel was saying, that it falls into your business model canvas. What are you sending out to the world and how are you communicating it as effectively as possible? And you know where you're communicating it and how you're communicating it, but still staying true to who you are.
It's all about being purpose-driven, right, Govind?
Yeah, I mean, they're kind of directing the lives of their consumers. But first question from me, Teresa, how far behind are we in terms of how we relate with our audiences or our customers and how they do?
I think South Africa is not far behind, but I think the African continent as a whole is still lagging quite far behind, especially in terms of our small businesses and our small business entrepreneurs. They haven't been able to identify themselves in terms of having a brand positioning. There's a lot of reactional marketing that's happening, but in terms of establishing themselves as a well-known brand, that hasn't, in Africa, there's still a huge need for that to happen.
Hazel, why is that? You spoke about the fact that we have 100-year-old companies. We have these old big corporations who have built their identity based on their business offering, who've built their customer base, who've got a sense of loyalty. And in the States, what we're seeing are these new entrants coming in, disrupting the entire market, who've got no history at all, employing what we talked about in previous sessions, guerrilla marketing, trying to place themselves in the lives of consumers before they even offer something. And it looks like in SA, we still have the loyalty buy. I mean, what is it about the Southern African context, Hazel, that do we lend more to loyalty buying or loyalty branding than the new version of branding?
It has to all, be centered around the customer in every sense of that term. If you're consumer-centric, you'll understand the shifts happening in the consumer space, the needs that the consumers have, and how you need to adapt accordingly. But I'd love to touch on a point that Teresa mentioned with regards to what the ethos of these brands in the international market. And I believe that a lot of these international brands are purpose-driven. They're purpose-led organizations, and that filters through to the culture. And I don't believe our African market is necessarily talking about purpose and making it the core of how brands deliver to the market. And purpose-led organizations are very visible, and you understand that they're purpose-led without them even telling you. It's quite clear. It's part of their DNA, if you look at them. And obviously that filters right through down to the culture. And the culture comes through the individuals, the employees who work for these organizations. So for the older organizations that have been around for over 100 years, they're like huge sleeping giants, and it takes a very long time for them to steer the ship. Some organizations have a presence in quite a few countries, whether it's on the continent or globally as well. So in order for it to cascade a shift in culture, in strategy, in its values, it does take a while to get the buy-in across over 5 markets across different continents. So while the intention is definitely there, I think it just takes a little bit longer for the older brands to make that turn because of their size, simply based on capacity. And then you also touched on an interesting point, Govan, around the startups, the disruptive startups in markets like the US. And what I've found in many readings that I've done is that the international entrepreneur market is made up, yes, of entrepreneurs, but a lot of them have a business school foundation, which allows them to, pivot their businesses a lot faster than one who wouldn't have gone for the full general management academic qualification. It does teach individuals about, managing a business, setting up a business, and all the facets that go into it. So I think they do have an advantage. Of course, it comes back to our nuances as a country, particularly honing in on South Africa, where it is a luxury to complete your undergrad and go straight into your postgrad, because a lot of us do have to start to pay back. I don't want to talk about black tax, but a lot of people are the first graduates in their families, and they need to look after the families that have put them through school. So spending an extra 3 years trying to do a postgrad is a luxury. And when you then start up your entrepreneurial venture, you're lacking that foundation that enables your business to enter in a lot more aggressive manner and disrupt the market. And I think over time, that'll start to correct itself as the societal shifts take place in our market.
I suppose that's why these conversations are so important. You spoke about purpose. You mean the purpose of the brand in offering something to the customer, or you're talking about something bigger than that?
Something bigger than that. I mean, when you start to talk about brand purpose, it's the DNA of the brand. It's how it shows up in the marketplace. It's the reason why the employees of that business wake up every day. Apart from generating shareholder revenue, what are we here to do? I mean, I could mention a couple of brands here, but I won't. But if I mention it, some brands are very much about wellness. And if you debrand a campaign, you can tell where it's coming from, because their DNA is all about driving wellness. While they may be driving loyalty and other value to them in the market, you can identify who they are because their persona comes through quite strongly based on that purpose-driven nature that they've tried to adopt in their business. So it is quite key, because then purpose defines your values, it defines the culture, it defines your mission and how you're going to tackle the market that you're operating in. And within that purpose, the customer is at the center of that purpose. It's all about how you're going to serve that customer. And if you understand the customer needs intrinsically and the changes thereof, it's easier to keep up with the customer as they also shift. I mean, and we talk about the customer lifetime value, from womb to tomb, literally. And it's relevant in most sectors of the economy. Where if you're selling bread, for example, you're consuming bread in a very different manner from the time someone is young versus when they become a parent. It's still the same commodity, but how it shows up and what it means to that consumer is very different. From the lunchbox in primary school right through to you serving up an amazing rye toast hors d'oeuvre meal as an adult. But it's still the same bread that's sticking with you. So as a company selling that commodity, it's important to track your consumers and the changes that are happening in their lives as well.
Very interesting. Terasai, what kind of awareness exists among marketers in Southern Africa about the need to foreground purpose?
There are a lot of meetings and seminars. I mean, with globalization happening and people having access to Zoom meetings, there's now a lot more interaction. Before you'd have to attend this big conference and attend this big event to learn all these insights. Now you can have a Zoom call or a Zoom meeting and you can share insights. You can have webinars, just like this platform on IMM, where we are teaching or sharing, more to say, information about brand and purpose. And already by the viewers listening to this, they can digest this and be able to apply it within their organizations. So there is information that now exists. There is collaborations that now exist. There is partnerships that now exist within different countries and different perspectives, which assists with the information spread.
Thank goodness for the IMM. To help speed that conversation along. So we're talking about what defines tomorrow's brands, right? So what kind of business or marketing strategy would define the brand of tomorrow? Hazel.
Again, I'm obsessed with the customer, because without the customer, there is no business. Without the customer, the brand does not exist. Now, I'm very much an advocate for customer value propositions versus just delivering a product in the market. And I'll unpack that a little bit. So the business of tomorrow, or today's business that's going to be around tomorrow, is one that's able to deliver meaningful value propositions to a consumer. And this goes beyond the product, because any competitor can replicate your product if you put it out in the market. You know, it takes a week, 2 weeks, a month, a couple of months for a competitor to replicate your product. But when you develop a customer value product, it means you've understood the needs of your customer and you've identified the unique position that you can play in the role of that customer, and you create stickiness. That way, if company ABC all offer the same product, but you're adding more value to your product to create that value proposition based on insights, you are going to be able to, number one, attract the customer and retain that customer, because they're getting something from you that nobody else can give them. I mean, if I look at the local market, for example, there are a lot of insurers in the market. I mean, insurers are a dime a dozen. People are sport for choice. But there's some insurers that are doing better than others because they're adding a little bit more stickiness to their products. Stickiness that forces a customer to stay with them. If a customer were to leave them, they would miss not just the product, but all the value that's been bolted onto this offer that the brand is giving the consumer. So it really is about trying to lock the consumer in and driving value that goes both ways between brand and consumer. And I strongly believe that's a key differentiator when an organization is looking for that unique selling point as far as their brand is concerned.
Yeah, I mean, people start to identify with brands. There was an interesting study conducted where people were put under an MRI machine and then told different things about Apple and Samsung. And the people who had real responses in the MRI machine the neurological responses came from Apple users who felt compelled to react with emotions of sadness when hearing something bad about their brand, and happiness when hearing something good about their brand. And just as for interest's sake, the people who were Samsung users only reported happiness when they heard something bad about Apple, but felt nothing when they heard something about Samsung. And the point of that study, or one of their outcomes, is that they said that the Apple company had successfully created brand loyalty to the point where the customer identifies as an Apple user, as part of their identity. And they put some of it down to the change in how they communicate with their customers. Apple's logo, of course, is think different. It's instructive. It's not a statement. Nike's slogan is just do it, which is also instructive. Samsung is, I think it's inspire the world, create a better future, also instructive. And then locally, we've just seen one of the news broadcasters change their slogan from a statement, which is just no fear, no favor, to an instructive slogan, which is think, question, act, where you're telling your consumer to do something instead of telling the consumer something about yourself. And I wonder whether or not that is the future of these big brands in South Africa, because I mean, you mentioned the insurers. The big one is you always get something out, which is so catchy, and it's a statement, and you know what to expect from it, but they haven't really moved towards telling the consumer what to do. And that seems like a bold move. What do you think, Hazel?
So I'm a bit biased because I have in fact been at the helm of brand repositioning, where we shifted from an old slogan to a more instructive slogan in my brand career. And definitely, you know, when you look at the brand metrics, you can see that the brand affinity does in fact rise when you start to do things the right way. So I'm in full support of the fact that I'm not surprised that global best practice is leaning towards that. I'm seeing that happening as well locally. And these instructive slogans are compelling. They require an action. You know, as marketers, when we put propositions out in the market, there's a call to action, right? Get it now, buy now, switch now. And a slogan that is instructive can be as powerful as a campaign call to action. And there's a lot more memory structure built around it. So I'm quite an advocate for instructive logos.
Teresa, I have these like theoretical concepts for us. Because I mean, I
really hope Apple paid you for that campaign that you just ran for them for free on this platform.
Well, I should point out that I'm not an Apple user in any format, actually. That I'm one of those users who find joy when hearing something bad about them. No, but it really made me think about whether or not that's something that's happening in a faraway country that's going to reach our shores in a few years, where we're not going to be sure how the consumer will react, or whether like the brands here are already plugged into that. We know the big ones are, but what about the smaller brands? You know, is that something you need to be brave enough to do, or is that just something that you pick up and do, Teresa?
So with the smaller ones, I think a large time, most of the times, smaller companies or smaller organizations tend to think that, you know, branding is their logo, or branding is their website, or branding is their LinkedIn profile or their Facebook page. But branding is actually a lot more than that. Exactly like what we were saying, that it's a purpose-led strategy that you have within your marketing campaigns. It's how you talk, it's how you present yourself, it's your sales strategy, it's your in-store strategy, it's your point of sale, it's your customer base, it's doing full-on customer discovery, which I think a lot of small brands don't do. They have an idea that this is what consumers would like, but they don't actually go into customer discovery, which is very important. And that's what's needed now, especially in the changing world. We have different generations, different target audiences. The rapid pace at which things are shifting within the market is so drastic that brands need to continuously be engaged in customer discovery in order for their brand positioning to keep resonating. And even with small business, sometimes you have to make a decision and say, is this working or is it not? And if it's not working, do you need to do another brand? Do you need to add another brand to your offering? Or do you need to scrap a brand from your offering? If you're investing a lot of money, time, and effort and not getting a return on investment after a few number of years as an entrepreneur, as a small business, you need to reevaluate that branding message and that business decision as a whole. And then even with the bigger organizations, they find the same thing. Some products are no longer selling on the market. They're no longer, people are no longer interested in them for various reasons. Could be technology, could be the entry of new markets, could be poor marketing, could be a variety of reasons. And so continuous customer evaluation is required as you're putting together your brand strategy.
You seeing that happen, Hazel? Or is it more reactive?
So if you look at the South African local context, you've seen quite a few brands crop up in the last 3 years or so. I'll talk about the two shoe brands that we all know, but we won't mention names. And they weren't around, say, 10 years ago, and they started to crop up. I started to notice them just before COVID-19 and into COVID-19 period. And they've literally taken over the shoe brand market at a local level. And I really believe that both brands have a very strong purpose that they're aligned to, or that they subscribe to. And they're starting to get that affinity. Now, Govind, you spoke about loyalty when you spoke about the device manufacturer. And there's an element of affinity that comes in. And you need to give customers the reason to affiliate with your brand. And you find with the local brands, it's really all about local is lekker. That's what it is, right? And people want to support what those brands stand for. They stand for hope as much as the beverage stands for happiness. The beverage that we all know stands for happiness. So it's all about that brand DNA. What do you want to be known for? And if it's hope, then you show up in that manner. And everything about that brand speaks to that. And then, you spoke about, again, on the device side, loyalty, affinity. There's an element of status as well that would have come out of that study. I mean, again, look at the German car brands, for example. They've had the African market for the longest time. If you drove one of the top two German brands, you'd arrived. And this is the case in most African markets. And it really does speak back to status. And the status isn't always about the cost of a vehicle. Often you walk into a vehicle showroom and the two leading German brands aren't necessarily the most expensive, but there is an element of status that's attached to those brands. So we are seeing that. And then Teresa mentioned something quite interesting, which was talking about understanding the consumer. And when you start to look at how to segment consumers, demographics are going to become a lot more challenging going forward. And that's something I want to throw at you both. Typical demographics are centered around age and even, age and gender. And gender historically was just male and female. Have you seen, Teresa, in your space, any brands that are segmenting beyond just male and female and actually going through the full spectrum? And how is that showing up in the marketplace? I don't know, maybe you came across it in the US. Perhaps we're a bit far behind in SA and Africa as a continent.
So I came across, unfortunately, not a great example, which was Bud Light, the beer brand. Bud Light was selling millions, and they decided to incorporate a transgender within their campaign. And sadly, it wasn't taken well by the consumers to this extent that they have lost almost 270 billion and a lot of market share. And they are still standing true to their brand positioning in terms of inclusivity, in terms of diversity. And it's something that brands will have to be cognizant of going forward to say, where are we? Are we for diversity? Are we for inclusivity? Then if that's the case, we might need to take a knock for a number of years until the market catches up to it. So that was the one case that I came through with. I think a similar case happened with Jeep when they launched their it was called, the campaign was the Very Gay Pride campaign. And they painted the whole truck with rainbow colors to celebrate diversity. And they got mixed messaging from their consumers, but at the same time, they also grew a huge market from there, but they also lost a lot of market share. So it's still it's still different waters that we are still treading upon. It's still a touch and go, but I do agree with you in terms of gender. Who are you now talking to? And also in terms of demographics. I mean, people are working from home. So can you really say that LSM 8 to 9 is living within Sandton and they're they're affiliated with this and they enjoy this type of lifestyle, and yet people are working from home. Some people are actually living all the way in Hartbeespoort by the dam, and they enjoy that same lifestyle, but they just need to log on and be able to attend their meetings. So in terms of being able to decipher where is your demographics, those are going to be quite key. And how do we go about that, Hazel? That would be a very good question.
I guess the internet kind of solves much of that problem. The people in Harties love online shopping. I know that. I have a bunch of friends there. And I guess, is that really what a brand of the future looks like? Tomorrow's brand, is that what's going to define it? Being able to access your brand from anywhere, Hazel?
Definitely. So channel convenience is already a much demanded aspect of a brand at the moment. Like Teresa said, people are now working in this hybrid environment, and you find that what's previously called the mass segment or the inclusive segment is also now accessing their preferred brands in the online ecosystem, and they're a lot more comfortable with online payments, and that's a shift we've started to see in the South African context. So brands are needing to stay on course and be as progressive as possible as far as channel convenience is concerned. Now, Teresa spoke about data analytics and the role of AI in the US market. South Africa we're on the journey, right? We're on our way there, even on the continent. And then you get brands like M-Pesa, for example, on the continent that have been leading the fintech solutions, this conversation for many years. And it's happening right here in the continent. And they're addressing a key need in their market using digital resources. M-Pesa is purely a digital offering that's available in the market. You even get the likes of EcoCash in the Zimbabwean market. That is also purely digital. The mum at the street corner is selling tomatoes. No cash is being traded. Everyone's on their smartphones. So with the increase in smartphone penetration at a continent-wide level and in SA, you'll start to see a lot more online engagement happening. And every time we hear about online purchases, we quickly think about the bigger brands. You're purchasing from Takealot, Amazon, and the like. No, transactions are happening on the device on a daily basis. And with more access to data and smartphones, we're going to see a lovely shift in that online shopping space.
Towards WhatsApp, I believe. That's some of the insights we received from our previous talks. So coming back to your point about the brand's attitude towards new emerging trends, the LGBTQI community, few brands seem to be skittish about treading there because they're not sure about how they'd be received. But I'd like us to talk about some of the safe spaces which exist for brands. One of them has historically been patriotism. Is there value from leveraging patriotism in the consumer in South African context? That one's for you, Hazel.
All right, sorry, I missed that note. Patriotism means different things in different markets, right? Depending on how the nationals of that market feel towards their own country. We take it for granted that national affinity exists regardless. In war-torn countries, it depends on which side of the fence one is sitting on, right? And it's also often linked to the ruling party and the like. So it can get very murky quite quickly. But in the South African context, local is lekker. And if brands aren't leveraging their localness, they're missing the mark. South Africans love all things South African. There's a lot of patriotism at play. And that leads me to another point I want to drive as well. You talked about logos, Govind. And when you get onto a platform like LinkedIn, you'll find a lot of brands shift their logos in line with the market trends at the time. This is Women's Month in South Africa for the whole of August, for example. And a lot of brands are somehow integrating a feminine element to their logos. And then during the Gay Pride Month, you saw some going rainbow. And during Africa Day month in May, some incorporated the African continent image into their logos. And I guess the question I'd like to pose to the forum is that a case of the logo, or how are brands now putting that into the CI and making it acceptable to change your logo depending on what's happening in the market? And maybe we should touch on what's happening in the US, and then we can touch on what's happening in SA as well. I'm quite eager to discuss that point in line with our brand strategy piece, because the CI is an output of a brand strategy. So what should our viewers be incorporating into the CI of tomorrow if we're seeing these shifts in logos based on market trends?
Parasite, what do you think?
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. Very interesting. I need to think about that one a little bit.
I mean,
because it's becoming more prevalent.
This is one of those moments where I need to think about that.
well, I mean, it's interesting that you said, is that a case of them bastardizing the logo? Maybe. I always view it as a lack of creativity on their part. When I see it as a consumer, I hate to see that. I honestly can't stand it, because my first reaction is like, well, you've run out of ideas, because now you're just placing anything on there to seem hip. And there's an old adage that everything is cool until your favorite brand adopts it, and then as soon as they adopt it, it becomes uncool. You know, if you classic example is the word Ayoba. Soon as one of those cell phone network providers adopted that word, everyone stopped using it. Everyone, because people want to see brands coming up with their own content. They don't want to see brands taking the people's content that is like kind of that comes from the ground level up, and then just appropriating it to try and score points with the consumer. That I found it, well, at least in my small circle, has not gone down well. So that's one of those things. I see it and then I'm like, oh man, it's nothing I can do, because I still want to use your website. But I honestly, it turns me off.
You're right. It does have to be authentic, right? So when brands try and participate in these trendy events or occurrences happening in around the world, they must still be authentic to who they are as a brand and what they stand for. And consumers should expect that brand to show up in a quirky way if it's in line with the brand DNA. And consumers expect it. You know, you talk about brand tonality. How does a brand show up? What is the tone of their communication and their engagement? What is that brand persona? So if the brand persona allows for that, then I think a brand can really leverage it and do it well. But if it's a me too copying because the other competitors are doing it and you think you can hop on the same wagon, it can go wrong very quickly, like you mentioned in the case of G, where it didn't necessarily work in their favor, even though the intention was noble. But the brand has got to be synonymous with what they stand for, and consumers will be more forgiving and are more likely going to enjoy seeing the brand change its logo in line with the different market shifts.
So in terms of changing your logo, it's creative, it's fun, but I think in this day and age, what people appreciate more is authenticity, in the sense that if it's Women's Month, what exactly are you doing as a brand to empower women? So thank you for changing your logo, but did you maybe build women some houses? Did you maybe do a women's leadership training? Did you perhaps within your company and within your organization give the women within your company some form of empowerment? You know, to what extent are you making tangible differences that we can see? If it's the youth, what are your youth programs? How impactful are they? Is it an innovation and training hub that you have set aside specifically for that? then people begin to look at that. And I think that was something that I actually personally witnessed whilst I was in the States, in the sense that we actually built a home under Habitat for Humanity. We actually built a home, and the family was there that was going to receive the house. They actually came to the site, and we could see we are putting these nails into these doors and framing this house for this recipient family. And that goes a long way in terms of authenticity, because it shows that the brand is really dedicated to the messaging that they are portraying.
That's awesome. You're right. The proof points have got to exist. It can't just be a tactic that one deploys. The proof points have got to be tangible. I fully support that. And I think that's when it becomes believable and authentic.
Yeah, where people think that you have an actual culture and you're not just doing it to get consumers. So on this platform, we like to talk about how the brand strategies will be used in the future. So we're talking about what defines the brands of tomorrow, right? And in previous episodes, we've been talking about how traditional marketing is alive and well, how influencers are being used by marketers, or effectively or not effectively, guerrilla marketing, digital being used as well. So I'd like to find out from you, Hazel and Terasai. Hazel, we'll start with you. For the brand of tomorrow, will it be defined by consistently relying on the traditional marketing platforms? Or do you think the brand of tomorrow is in its identity is being defined by a new way of marketing itself?
So I strongly believe that the brand of tomorrow will be defined by the consumers that they serve, versus the traditional elements that we've been subscribing to. And the brands of tomorrow will carry so much power that they will start to determine the direction that businesses take, because they're the voice of the consumer in that business. One of the key insights I gathered, and it was almost an aha moment, an epiphany, where someone told me about the value of the brand function in a business and how it needs to interplay with other functions like the ops function and hold the ops function to account. And I can unpack that in the next few minutes. But the brand function has to hold the ops team to account. The brand function has to hold the customer experience team to account, because the brand promise is lived through the products that are built in the ops space, the channel availability of that offering, the customer experience at across all customer touch points, whether it's the call center when someone has a complaint, or the store when someone is actually trying to purchase a product, or even in the digital e-commerce environment where self-service is critical and things must work. So the brand promise should never be articulated in the marketplace if ops cannot meet that brand promise, i.e. no stock, if customer experience cannot meet the brand promise, if the sales channels cannot meet that brand promise. So all these functions actually are intertwined. And you often find marketers in most boardrooms not necessarily rising up and questioning the lack of consumer centricity in a boardroom. And because marketing hasn't always had a seat at the exco table, right? And the brands of the future will have marketing at the exco table. Brands of the future will listen to marketers. Brands of the future will understand that the brand and marketing team are in fact the voice of the consumer within that group.
100%.
That's powerful, yeah. I mean, it sounds like you're saying the CEOs of the future will be marketers.
They have already started coming through, and I think just some words for the viewers who are obviously part of the IMM fraternity and study marketing, brand and marketing. Don't ever apologize for being a marketer. You're not just a marketer in the boardroom. You're the voice of the consumer. marketing is a science, and it should be acknowledged as such. It shows up with a whole lot of magic and flair, but there's the science behind the magic that brand managers and marketers have got to get into the organization. You have to drive that narrative. Lots of strategy goes into it. Lots of scientific elements are fed into our system in order for us to develop these amazing campaigns. And with data analytics, digital marketing, the world is, our oyster as brand and marketers, because we do need to always leverage the tools around us to continue to understand who our consumers are, how to engage them, and what their needs are.
So IMM is really good at plugging marketers into data pools where they could find out what the consumer's saying. But is that different to becoming the voice of the consumer? I mean, it's one thing to understand your customer base. It's another to represent them. Taras, I'd like to start with you on this. How does a marketer become the voice of a consumer?
So I've actually seen, even within countries, they're actually starting to have marketers as politicians, because we now are the voice. You are selling your country to some extent. You're selling your tourism sector. You are selling your country, so that investors can come into the country. But if you're not speaking the language that they need to understand, and if you're not coming up with creative ways to engage with them, even on a political level, you can see it even within Zambia, for example. The Minister of Tourism was an ex-marketer. Reason being, tourism needs to boost. Tourism invests billions of dollars into their country. So key people of influence now need to be marketers, because the world is changing at such a rapid pace that we need that level of influence, as Hazel has strongly put it.
What do you think, Hazel, about becoming the voice of the consumer? Explain it to marketers who may not have done it before, who want to do it, but who don't know where to begin.
So if you're, just the consumer insights we have access to and are exposed to are very powerful. But if we're not taking those insights into the boardrooms that determine the strategy of a business, and ensuring that as we're writing on the walls and formulating the strategy, we continue to put the customer first and have the customer needs at the center of the strategy that we're developing, then we don't have the voice of the customer in the room. And as marketers, we're the custodians, in most cases, of the research that's done around consumers. And it's important for us to always bring that through and almost have the checklist to say, whatever we develop as a business has got to pass through these filters. If the customer is demanding ethical standards from the business, then we must note that. If the customer is demanding transparency, then that must be noted. If the customer is demanding convenience, how then are our sales channels adhering to that need of that consumer? If our call center runs from 8 to 4:30, surely convenience isn't playing a role in that. And if our sales channels haven't necessarily shifted to the digital ecosystem where consumers can buy 24/7 because they have the capability to, then we're not listening to what the consumers say. So the voice of the consumer is all about understanding those insights and continuously reinforcing what the consumer is looking for throughout the business. If the production team is still producing the wrong quantities, and yet customers want to order their product and get them in real time, if the logistics isn't working and people want their groceries in 60 minutes versus 2 days, there is an issue. So it's all about understanding what is the customer looking for and holding everyone else in the business to account as far as delivering to that customer, because that becomes the brand promise that everyone has got to be adhering towards.
And research doesn't lie. You can't lie with the numbers, you can't lie with the data. So one way of empowering yourself as a marketer is to have that research base. So you're saying, I'm coming in with these statistics because this is what the consumer has requested. This is the survey that we conducted. These are the research outcomes that have come through. So as long as you are able to invest in research and be able to analyze what that data is communicating, then you can make tangible changes, because you can't argue with stats.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because those stats are bigger than the individuals in the room.
Even when the individuals don't want to admit it. Which is often the case in the
We know
corporate
there'll
world.
always be challenges. We know there'll always be challenges, always. But the key thing is to have that mindset that this should be how it's supposed to, and then to keep on raising the hand until that becomes the required outcome.
Approaches
And,
everything.
Yeah, sorry. So Govind, just to follow on and from what Teresa said, in our campaign development, it's often very subjective when you present it to a broader forum in the business, and everyone has their opinion of what a great brand campaign should look like. But if it's insight driven and insight led, it becomes less of a subjective debate, because you're simply responding to the market insights and what the consumer is looking for, and how you translate it in messaging comes through more scientifically versus subjective, allowing various parties in the business to question and steer the campaign in a specific direction. So you're right, Teresa, it really is there to empower the brand and marketing folk out there.
Yeah, above everything that we've discussed today, I think that's probably one of the more potent points that will define the future of tomorrow's brands. So at this juncture, we'll have a look back at the conversation. I think when we do our takeaways, it's kind of like answering the question, because today's topic is a question about what defines tomorrow's brands. So Teresa, I'll start with you about what your key takeaways were from this conversation, and then particularly what you think marketers should be taking away from this as they try to define tomorrow's brands.
So key takeaways would be that the brand is almost a state of being, so to speak. It's defining your purpose, your business model canvas, as Hazel says. And then that goes out to all the filters of your communication, your operations, your production, your creative, your employees, how you conduct yourself in every place, because that becomes a key component of your business. And brands that will be relevant tomorrow are the ones that can engage with consumers and be able to address consumer needs, and be able to also quickly adapt to the changes within the environment, and be able to make authentic changes in terms of authentic statements. If you represent helping communities, then you're strong to that and strong to that truth. If you represent status, then you're strong to that truth and to the messaging that you have within that truth. And so it's about filtering to all those touch points so that your brand is always relevant.
Hazel, what are your takeaways here?
Oh, quite a few. Where do I start? I think one of the key takeouts is that while Africa might seem as if it's marginally behind the United States, there are nuggets where we've managed to get it right. For example, that example I gave on fintech, and it's simply a market that's addressing a key pain point and need as far as consumers are concerned. And I enjoyed the part where Teresa spoke about aggressive marketing that she saw overseas, and the daily use of data analytics in the decision-making process by brand managers and brands overall. And I think it's important for local brands to start to embed the use of data analytics in their day-to-day approach in order for us to truly understand the needs of the consumer. Research that we've spoken about today now takes many different shapes and forms. Access to insights is critical. And data analytics falls right in that space with regards to being able to utilize data analytics to determine the way forward for a brand. And it all comes from consumers, right? It's all consumer insight led, and that's what it is. One of the key things I'd like to reiterate as well is the role of the brand and marketing manager in an organization, and the fact that while we're the brand custodians, we must hold other functions to account as far as delivering upon the brand promise. It's not the job of the brand function only, it's the job to be done across all functions where we need to be delivering the brand promise, because that can make or break the brand strategy and the business ultimately as well. So it starts and ends with the customer. We are the customer in the room. We are the voice of the consumer. Thankfully, through insights and things like data analytics, it's very possible.
Hazel, you're such an excellent advocate for the role of the marketer in the boardroom. And you speak with such confidence about what a marketer should be in terms of how it represents the brand and how the brand should affect the company. I'm just wondering whether you've seen the same approach from other marketers in the big boardrooms. Is this something that you already see happening, or you think this is an emerging trend?
It's something I see happening at the executive and C-suite level as far as marketers are concerned. But I do find a lot of self-doubt among younger, new marketers that have just graduated when they're standing against or standing alongside so-called professional roles in the business, whether it's the CAs and the lawyers. And marketers tend to step back and almost be apologetic about what they studied and the role they play in the business. And that needs to shift. That is going to shift. Because all roles are important in a business, which is why they exist in that organization. But marketers have got to stop being apologetic about being marketers. As the young folk rise up through the ranks, they'll start to understand the need of the marketing function within the business as far as driving growth is concerned.
I think there'll be a lot of young marketers watching this suddenly going to stand up with their stomachs in, chest out, going into the boardrooms.
We're in the business of driving business growth. That is what we do. And how do you do that? You create demand, market. And how's that possible? You create awareness, and then in come the magic through campaigns. But we're very astute business individuals at the end of the day when it comes to us as marketers.
Yeah, and we've seen brands fail based on them failing to consider how the consumer views them or engages with them. So you're absolutely right. And I think that's about all the time we have for this week. Unfortunately, there are so many other points that I wanted to talk about. I have them written down here, but I think that what we got today is a good understanding of what will define the brands of tomorrow. And also, importantly, I think what role marketers will play in defining the brands of tomorrow, not necessarily as someone implementing the business strategy, but perhaps as someone directing it based on what the consumer wants to do, what the consumer's thinking. Thank you so much for your time, Hazel Chimhandamba. She's a marketing veteran, an industry leader, nearly 20 years experience in South Africa. Terasai Moffat, our resident marketing enthusiast, fresh from the States, here to give us insight. I think we had a great conversation. Thank you, ladies, for your time. We do appreciate it. That's what we try to bring here at the Institute of Marketing Management's Friday Flash Talks. Thank you to you, the viewer, for taking part in this discussion. Remember to engage with it. Share your views on LinkedIn, on Twitter, comment on the YouTube posts that are up as well. Share them on your WhatsApp statuses and take the conversation further. We'll be bringing you more insights from the IMM Friday Flash Talks as usual at the end of the month. But for now, from myself, Govan Whittles, your host, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.